No contact does not end the control. It often continues silently inside your mind. Even after silence, something still reacts, still remembers, still feels pulled back. Because real freedom is not about blocking someone, it is about reaching a mental state where they no longer affect you at all. If you've ever gone no contact but still felt emotionally connected, still thinking, still replaying, still feeling disturbed inside, then what I am about to explain will shift your entire understanding of healing. Stay with this carefully, because the real solution is not what most people are told. You went no contact. You blocked the number. You deleted the photos. You told yourself it was completely over and that you were done with that chapter of your life. And still, here you are, sitting in silence and thinking about them when you least expect it. You replay the arguments again and again in your head. You question the things that were said and done. You try to make sense of moments that never made sense in the first place. And even though everything is physically gone, something inside you still feels heavy, like it never fully ended. Like a part of you is still stuck in that same emotional space. Let me say something that most people will not say clearly enough. No contact is not the same thing as healing. No contact is only silence, and silence by itself does not repair anything inside you. When you remove a person but do not deal with what they left behind in your mind, you are simply living in a quieter version of the same emotional prison. The environment changes, but the internal state remains untouched. And that is why so many people still feel trapped, even after they have done everything right on the outside. Because what is inside them has not been addressed or rebuilt properly. Here is the truth that is difficult to accept. The narcissist does not need to be physically present to still be active in your mind. They do not need to call you or message you to continue influencing your thoughts. Even after blocking them completely, their presence can remain in the form of memories, emotional triggers, and internal confusion. You can remove every external connection and still feel internally connected. Because what they created was not just a relationship, it was a psychological imprint that continues to run quietly in the background of your thinking. And this is where the deeper question appears. What if everything you thought was the solution was only the first step? What if there is something far more important than just cutting contact? Something that does not just distance you from the person, but actually removes their psychological influence from your inner world completely. Because if the mind is still reacting, still replaying, still emotionally attached in some form, then the work is not finished. There is something deeper that still needs attention, something more internal than most people ever realize. Before we understand what actually works, we have to understand what really happened. Because most people believe they are recovering from a relationship, but that is only on the surface. The relationship itself was just the setting, just the external frame. The real damage was not only what happened between two people, but what slowly got built inside your mind during that entire experience. Patterns, beliefs, emotional reactions, and self-doubt were all shaped over time in ways that are not immediately visible. At the core, a narcissist is not just someone who is selfish or difficult. That is a very shallow explanation that misses the deeper structure completely. Psychologically, it is a person who builds a false identity that feels strong and superior on the outside, but is actually extremely fragile on the inside. This false self depends heavily on external validation to survive emotionally. Without attention, admiration, or control, their internal sense of stability begins to collapse. So they constantly seek something from others to keep that image alive. That need for constant validation is what drives their behavior in relationships. They do not just want connection, they want emotional supply. They need reactions, attention, emotional dependence, and control to feel stable within themselves. And in order to secure that supply, they slowly reshape the person they are with. Not always in obvious ways, but through repeated emotional patterns that create confusion, dependence, and self-doubt. Over time, the other person starts to rely on them for clarity, approval, and emotional direction. The human brain, however, is not built to easily detect slow emotional manipulation. It is built to bond, to trust, and to look for consistency in people we care about. So when someone repeatedly gives warmth and then removes it, the brain does not always interpret it as danger. Instead, it interprets it as uncertainty that needs to be solved. This creates a cycle of emotional chasing, where the brain keeps trying to regain the positive moments. And in that process, it begins to attach itself even more strongly. This is why it feels like withdrawal when you leave. This is why no contact can feel uncomfortable instead of peaceful at first. And this is why, even after a long time has passed, you still feel pulled back emotionally, even when you logically know it is over. It is not just memory that is active. It is a conditioned emotional response that was built over time. Your brain learned a pattern of highs and lows, and now it is trying to adjust to the absence of that pattern. You were not weak in that situation. What happened is that your brain was responding normally to an abnormal emotional environment. It adapted to inconsistency, and that adaptation created attachment. So when you step away, it feels like something is missing, not because you need that person, but because your nervous system got used to that cycle. And breaking that cycle is not instant. It requires more than just distance. It requires internal rewiring. No contact in reality is not the full solution. It is only the starting point. It is the moment you stop new damage from entering your system. It is like stopping a wound from being cut further. But stopping the injury is not the same as healing the injury. Many people stop there and expect time alone to fix everything. But time without understanding or inner change does not heal deep psychological patterns. It only moves them further into the background. What often happens instead is that the pain does not disappear, it shifts. It appears in different parts of life. Curious, it may show up in new relationships where trust feels difficult again. It may appear in emotional reactions that feel stronger than the situation itself. It may even appear as an internal voice that questions your own value or judgment. The external situation changes, but the internal imprint remains active until it is consciously addressed. And this is where the real transformation begins. Not in simply removing someone from your life, but in becoming internally stable enough that their emotional influence no longer reaches you. That means rebuilding how you see yourself, how you respond emotionally, and how you interpret past experiences. It is a process of becoming psychologically independent, where your emotional system is no longer tied to the approval or memory of another person. When that level of internal change happens, something very important shifts. The emotional charge begins to disappear. The memories may still exist, but they no longer carry the same weight. The triggers lose their intensity. The internal reactions begin to quiet down. And over time, what once felt emotionally overwhelming starts to feel distant and neutral. Not because you forced yourself to forget, but because the internal system no longer feeds it energy. At that point, the power dynamic completely changes. What once felt like control or influence was never real power in the first place. It was based on emotional dependence and internal uncertainty. And when that uncertainty is removed, there is nothing left for that influence to attach itself to. the connection loses its psychological foundation. And without that foundation, it naturally collapses on its own, not through force, but through internal change. The 5 transformations that truly destroy narcissistic power. Before we go further, if this is already touching something deep inside you, if you recognize yourself in these words, do one thing right now. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. One share could shift someone's entire direction.
Encouraging. Now let's go deeper.
Transformation 1. Emotional literacy over emotional suppression. The first thing the narcissist trained you to do was doubt your own emotions. They called you overly sensitive. They called you dramatic. They made your emotional reality feel like a personal flaw. And over time, you absorbed that message. You began filtering your feelings even before you fully felt them. You started questioning yourself. Am I overreacting? Before you even understood what you were reacting to. This is emotional illiteracy, the inability to read your inner world clearly, and it becomes the base of narcissistic control. A person who cannot trust their feelings will always hand over their reality to someone else. And the narcissist was always there, ready to replace your truth with theirs. The first transformation that truly begins to break their hold is developing what researchers call emotional granularity. This is not only about feeling emotions, it is about identifying them clearly, naming them accurately, locating them in your body, understanding what they are trying to signal, and responding with awareness instead of suppression. When you feel anxious, can you tell if it is anticipatory anxiety, relational anxiety, or existential anxiety? When you feel anger, can you separate anger that is pointing to a boundary violation from anger that is just old pain finding a new outlet? This difference is powerful because once you can read your emotions with precision, you stop reacting blindly and start responding consciously. And a person who responds instead of reacts cannot be easily controlled through emotional triggers, which is the narcissist's main tool. Start a daily emotional mapping habit. At the end of each day, sit quietly for around 10 minutes. Ask yourself what you felt today and when you felt it. Not the story of the events, just the emotional experience itself.
The texture, the shifts, the intensity.
Over time, this practice begins to reshape the neural pathways that were conditioned to suppress your inner world. You slowly begin to trust yourself again. And that trust in yourself becomes the first solid brick in a wall that keeps the narcissist out, not just physically, but psychologically. Transformation 2. Reclaiming your narrative. Narcissists are highly skilled storytellers. Specifically, they are skilled at telling stories about you. During the relationship, they constructed a version of reality where you were always the problem, the unstable one, the overly needy one, the person who should feel lucky they were even tolerated, the one who caused all the conflict. And if they were socially skilled, they repeated this story to friends, family, and sometimes even children. They positioned themselves as the calm, long-suffering figure trying to survive your chaos. This narrative does not disappear when the relationship ends. It stays inside you.
It shows up in quiet moments.
It makes you doubt your own memory. It makes you question your interpretation of events. It even makes you say things like, "I wasn't perfect either," as if imperfection justifies mistreatment. The second transformation is about taking back authorship of your story. This is not about rewriting history in a way that makes you innocent and them evil. That would just create another distortion. It is about seeing the truth clearly. It is about going back through your experiences with the awareness of narcissistic patterns and asking what actually happened without confusion or borrowed interpretation. This process is often called narrative reconstruction. It means revisiting your memories not to relive them emotionally, but to understand them accurately from a clearer psychological perspective. Journaling can help. Therapy can help. But the real shift happens internally when you start taking back control of your interpretation.
You stop accepting their version of who you are.
You begin to write your own version where you are someone who experienced psychological manipulation and survived it. When your story changes, something important begins to shift. Shame starts to lose its grip. Shame depends on the belief that you were at fault. But when you recognize that what you went through was not just a difficult relationship, but emotional abuse, that shame begins to dissolve. And in its place, clarity starts to grow. The same clarity that was slowly taken from you during the relationship begins to return. Transformation 3. Rebuilding identity independent of their reflection. One of the most painful truths in these relationships is that you do not only lose the person when it ends, you also lose the version of yourself that existed around them. Even if that version was unstable or diminished, it was still part of your identity structure. When the relationship ends, many people experience what feels like an internal collapse, a strange emptiness where their sense of self used to feel anchored. The narcissist often contributed to this by becoming your mirror, reflecting back who you were in ways that changed over time, from idealization in the beginning to criticism and devaluation later. This creates dependence on external reflection. You begin to understand yourself through how someone else responds to you. Over time, your identity becomes less internally rooted and more externally shaped. The third transformation is building an autonomous identity, a self that does not rely on external validation to feel real or stable. This is not arrogance or emotional isolation, it is internal security. It is knowing who you are without needing constant confirmation from others.
Encouraging, this is built gradually through small choices.
Choosing based on your own preference instead of imagined approval. Spending time alone without distraction and learning to stay present with yourself. Reconnecting with interests, habits, and passions that existed before the relationship, or that were slowly pushed aside during it. Every decision made from your own values instead of external expectations adds another layer to your inner foundation. Over time, this changes how you move, how you speak, and how you carry yourself. A quiet confidence begins to form that is not performed, but built into your structure. This is the version of you that cannot be easily influenced because it is no longer dependent on outside validation. Transformation 4. Mastering the empathy trap. One of the most misunderstood aspects of narcissistic relationships is that the people who experience them are not weak. In many cases, they are deeply empathetic, emotionally aware, and highly attuned to others. These qualities are strengths, but without boundaries, they can become points of exploitation. Empathic individuals naturally respond to emotional pain, even when it comes from people who repeatedly harm them. The narcissist often uses small moments of vulnerability, brief displays of sadness, or stories of past pain to activate your empathy. You respond naturally. You listen. You comfort. You make allowances. You give more chances. And slowly, this response becomes predictable. Your empathy becomes something that can be triggered and used whenever needed. This is not because your empathy is wrong, but because it is unprotected. The fourth transformation is not about removing empathy. When you develop cognitive empathy alongside affective empathy, you gain a powerful kind of clarity. You can see someone's pain even a narcissist's pain, without being controlled by it. You can understand that their behavior may come from deep psychological wounds, without that understanding turning into tolerance for abuse. You can hold compassion for a person and still refuse to stay in a harmful relationship with them. These are not contradictions. They are signs of emotional maturity. And when you reach this level, the narcissist's most powerful tactic, the display of vulnerability, loses its effect completely. They show their pain, and instead of reacting or trying to fix it, you simply observe it calmly. The manipulation has no place to land anymore. The emotional hook does not catch anything. And for the narcissist, that creates a very unfamiliar experience. The feeling of having no control over your emotional response. Transformation 5 is becoming your own source of validation. This is the final and most complete shift, and when it happens, the narcissist becomes irrelevant in your inner world permanently. The deepest mechanism of narcissistic control is dependency on external validation. From the beginning, the narcissist positions themselves as the authority on your worth. Their approval means you are valuable. Their disapproval makes you feel lacking. Their affection, which is often inconsistent and conditional, creates a cycle of emotional craving that keeps your nervous system always searching for reassurance. That constant seeking is exactly what gives them psychological control. This pattern often connects with early emotional development. Most people begin life needing external validation from caregivers to feel safe and secure. Over time, with healthy development, that external need becomes internalized into stable self-worth. But narcissistic abuse disrupts this process. It weakens or dismantles your internal sense of value and pushes you back into emotional dependence, where your self-worth depends on how someone else reacts to you. The narcissist then becomes the internal voice of judgment, shaping how you see yourself, even after they are gone. The fifth transformation is the full replacement of that internalized voice with what can be called an internal secure base. This is the deep inner feeling that you are acceptable, worthy, and enough without needing outside confirmation. It is built through consistent self-validation. Not empty affirmations that you do not believe, but honest and steady acceptance of your own experiences. When you make a mistake, instead of turning to shame or seeking immediate reassurance, you pause. You acknowledge what happened without denial. You understand what can be learned from it, and then you treat yourself with fairness instead of punishment. You recognize that being imperfect and being worthy can exist at the same time. Over time, this practice changes how your mind evaluates you. The internalized critical voice begins to weaken because it is no longer fed by shame or self-rejection. Instead, it is replaced by a calmer internal presence, one that is steady, balanced, and supportive. You begin to relate to yourself differently, not as someone who must constantly prove their worth, but as someone who already has it. When this transformation fully develops, something significant happens. The narcissist loses emotional relevance in your inner world. Their opinion no longer carries weight. Their attempts to provoke reaction no longer affect you. Their reappearances in your life, whether direct or indirect, no longer trigger emotional chaos. There is no anxiety, no longing, and no emotional pull. Only recognition without engagement. This is not suppression. It is true emotional detachment built through inner change. At this point, their influence collapses because it was never truly power in the first place. It was dependence created through emotional instability and self-doubt. When that internal instability is removed, There is nothing left for them to control or influence. What remains is a version of you that no longer reacts from old conditioning, but responds from clarity and stability. No contact is only the beginning. It stops new harm from entering your life, but it does not automatically repair what was already shaped inside you. The real transformation is internal. It is the slow process of rebuilding emotional strength, identity, boundaries, empathy, and self-worth from within. It is the process of becoming someone who is no longer shaped by external control. And when that process is complete, the real outcome is not what you did to them, it is what you became for yourself. A person who is no longer easily influenced, emotionally controlled, or defined by someone else's behavior. A person who has returned to themselves fully. That is where real power has always been. In conclusion, the real journey is not about defeating someone outside of you, but about rebuilding what was shaped within you. Every transformation you heard is not about anger, revenge, or control, but about awareness, clarity, and emotional strength. No contact may begin the process, but true freedom comes when your inner world no longer reacts to the past in the same way. When you develop emotional understanding, reclaim your own story, rebuild your identity, master your empathy with boundaries, and become your own source of validation, something important changes. You stop living from old emotional patterns and start responding from a place of stability and self-respect. The connection to manipulation weakens not because you fight it, but because it no longer has anything inside you to hold on to. At that point, the past loses its emotional power, not because it is erased, but because it is no longer active within you. You move forward with a clearer mind, stronger boundaries, and a steady sense of self. And in that state, you are no longer defined by what happened, but by what you have become.